So it's a lecture about how to lead a modding team, which hopefully I know something about. So this is how I do presentations. I've done an agenda that I'll follow through, hopefully get through in the hour, starting with a typical day. That's obviously allowing for the fact that we're in Beyond Skyrim, so typical is always a bit different, but I've tried to choose something that I think is typical. Organization, how I go about it, the importance of goals, communication, collaboration, how to recover when things don't go to plan, lessons learned, and then hopefully, depending on how long this takes, we'll have some time for some questions at the end. So a little bit about me to start with. So that screenshot there is Dark Creations, which is what Beyond Skyrim used before we all moved to Discord. That just shows that I joined on April the 29th, 2015, which is a very long time ago. To begin with, I joined Beyond Skyrim Morrowind. Was there between 2015 and 2017. At the same time, I became a member of Beyond Skyrim Robcbwilson in 2016 as a level designer. I was brought on initially to take some screenshots, but Bellatrix is a very clever lady, and she realized that as soon as I saw how cool Robcbwilson was, I would immediately want to join and stay there, and I have done so. I've been there ever since. I'm very excited about seeing it finished. I've watched it grow up from, there were 4 of us back then to however many there are now, and as I'm sure you've seen from all the streams, it's making amazing progress. I was asked I joined Beyond Skyrim Elsweyr in 2017 and became a lead, and then became the overall project lead in January 2020. I've also been PR lead since 2016, and myself and Mr. JGT, who's also a teacher here in the AU, co-founded TES Valenwood in May of last year, which is also a partner project of the AU. So just briefly, because I know a lot of people ask about it, it's a very, very, very quick history of Elsweyr. That screenshot in the background is actually a screenshot of the original Oblivion mod, which started in 2006 and was known as the Elsweyr Confederacy project. It didn't get anywhere past alpha stage, but it's actually still available. If you go to the Oblivion Nexus page, you can still find it and download it and have a look. It was hosted on the now defunct Silgrad Tower forums between 2010 and 2011. And then in 2011, the original Oblivion mod migrated to Skyrim. The Elsweyr team moved to Dark Creations and became Beyond Skyrim Elsweyr, Sugar and Blood, which is our strapline. It was rebooted around about 2016 after the team shrank to literally a handful of people by one of the original modders who was in the team since pretty much the beginning, the old G Bard, who is actually the person I took over from as project lead. So into the actual production part of it itself. This morning I decided I would try and write down what a typical day is for me as a lead in Beyond Skyrim. Starts right at the very beginning with pretty much when I wake up, which is checking Discord for direct messages. And then I look at the servers I'm on, Elsweyr, Valenwood, the PR Discord servers, the council channel, etc., and reply to any posts that are there. Then I put my PR hat on for a second and check a bunch of places for new messages, our subreddit, Facebook, Twitter, and Nexus Mail. Then I have some desktop reminder software, which I consult to see if there's anything that is expiring today or soon that I need to take a look at. Then I thought I'd list some typical team-based tasks, which include things like providing feedback on claims, tidying up and adding new claims to Trello, speaking to team members in DMs, checking progress towards short, medium and long-term goals. Elsweyr being one of the less popular Beyond Skyrim teams, shall we say, we have to actively recruit. So active recruitment is something that I do. and I do it quite regularly to bolster the team numbers. And then lastly, I check on the progress of any PR strategies that are ongoing. Once I've done all that, I then look at what I'm going to do personally for the day, and what I will typically look at is thinking about where we are in terms of our short and medium term goals. I then decide on my personal activity for the day. Currently in Elsweyr, we're focusing on implementing and merging all of our finished assets, so that's where I'm working at the moment. So into the key tenets of project leadership, one of the big ones is organization. I personally use a software called Desktop Reminder to keep me organized. To keep track of the team itself, I have a quite enormous and very detailed Excel spreadsheet, which I keep up to date. Not only does it hold the current roster of people on the team, but it also have to keep track of anyone who's left, because obviously when we release, we need to credit everybody who's contributed to the mod, so they are all documented as well. One of the things that we started doing, I think it was either early this year or late last year, we centralized all of our documentation into a single channel on Discord, including documents designed specifically to help new members, because it's easier that way to find things, because Google Drives in particular can get a bit overwhelming, and it can be difficult to find things. So we thought that would be a good way of allowing people to very, very quickly find all the documentation that they might need. Lastly, under organization, Trello, which we use for claims management, and the Google Drive, which is used for documentation, are regularly tidied up and audited. So the next one is a slide that I put in this morning, which is the importance of goals. So this is something that it was actually suggested to me by a member of the Elsweyr core, focusing more particularly on short-term goals. So obviously they're important. It's important to know what you're doing and why you're doing it and what comes next, and that's what goals are used for. They could be department specific. So for example, Sotha's 2D team might have a specific goal, or they could be a team goal. The reason why short-term goals are important is because most members are on the team for short periods of time. They are aware of what we're doing, but they're also aware that it's potentially many years away. So in order to get them more engaged, short-term goals are added to our goals as well, so that they've got something to focus on, something that they can actually see be completed. So for example, an Elsweyr short-term goal at the moment is completing all the assets needed to clutter an interior. So that's what the team is currently working on within the medium-term goals and the long-term goals. So for example, a medium-term goal allows the team to focus on a shared goal 1 or 2 years in the future. For example, completing the writing and assets for a city. So you can wrap the short-term goal into the medium-term goal, which then wraps into the long-term goal. The long-term goal, obviously for us, is a pre-release. And that's important to give the team an overall focus and something to drive towards. The last thing I'd say about goals is that internal delivery dates can be helpful, but it's important not to focus on them too much, because we're volunteers. Because of that, it's very easy for goals to slip, because unlike if you're at work, somebody who's very key to the project may leave. For example, we're currently concepting our temple set, our interior and exterior temple tile set, which is very important to both to the team but also to our pre-release as well. Unfortunately, the person who was halfway through it, because he was such a talented concept artist, was offered a job and can now no longer work on the team. So we now have to find someone to replace him. So if we'd had a hard deadline in terms of time on that, that would be very difficult for us to meet, because somebody left. So the next thing that's important is communication. We have regular team meetings. They're every 2 months. They're also recorded on a private YouTube channel, so that people who aren't there can watch them. Those recordings are monitored, so that if they become too popular, then they can be cancelled, because obviously internal meetings are for internal teams, the internal team only. So if they ever got leaked, they would immediately be removed from the YouTube channel. Team members are regularly contacted by leads, once a month, in fact, just to see how they're going, to see where they're at, to see if they've got any questions, to see how their claims are going, on top of any conversations that we have on Discord. New members are contacted more frequently, at least weekly, until they're ready to start their first claim. And once they've started their first claim, typically they understand how the team works and how we work as individuals within that team, so they can pretty much standing on their own 2 feet. We also have internal streams every 4 to 6 months, which we use to showcase progress. Those are typically done around the team meetings, but if something really exciting happens in between, then we'll have a special one as well. And collaboration is another key part of leading a team. And so to that end, we encourage people to stream on the team server whenever possible. And another thing that's new in 2021 is the idea of holding workshops. We hold them in voice chat, and they are specifically designed so that we can gather ideas for all aspects of Khajiit life. So we've done a number. We've done one on musical instruments, how the Khajiit use temples, weather. We've just recently had one on lore. And what will happen with that is that all the ideas that are put forward will be written down, and then they'll be presented to the lead of the team. So, for example, how the Khajiit use temples. All the ideas were presented to Omda, who's our writing lead, and he then stored all the good ones on Trello. And any ideas that didn't quite fit, like there was one idea about a confessional, which obviously is a Catholic thing, which wouldn't work in Elsweyr because they're not Catholic. But that idea was taken and then was used by Omda to create something Khajiiti that was based on the idea of a confessional, but completely different. So very, 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 very good for spinning ideas off into other areas, because people think about the same thing in many different ways, because we have people from all around the world, and that diversity of experience and life, etc., gives people different aspects, different ways of looking at the same thing, which can then drive off into completely different ideas. So we really enjoy those as a team. We're trying to do more of them, and they're a key part of how we collaborate and how we work. In addition, the core team work very, very hard to create a collaborative, friendly and safe environment. One of the things that we're very proud on Elsweyr is that we are told quite regularly that we have one of the friendliest and most organised of teams. So that's something that we work very, very hard on, and we're constantly focusing on making sure that continues to be the case. So sometimes things don't go to plan. So how do you recover when things don't go well? So you wake up in the morning and you think you've got a fantastic idea, and then you pitch it to the core team, which is what normally happens first. You pitch it to the core before pitching it to the team, and you pitch your great idea, and people don't like it. So you have 2 options, and I'll give examples for each as I go along. So if you're absolutely certain that you're right and that people either don't understand or don't appreciate what you're saying, then you can try and convince people that your idea is best for the team. And as I said, trust your instincts. If you believe that you're right, then you have to back yourself, and also don't be afraid to question convention. And this will become obvious when I use my example. So my example for this is that last year I decided that Elsweyr as a team was no longer going to use placeholders in landscaping. And what that means is that we are not going to do any landscaping until we have the full asset suite needed for any biome or area in the project, which is why over the last 2 years-ish, the overhead maps for Elsweyr haven't changed, because we are not using placeholders in landscaping anymore. Now, the reason why this was such a sea change is because that's what every team has done ever since Beyond Skyrim's been a thing. IB, Morrowind, Cyrodiil, every single team has used placeholders. And it was my contention, and I managed to convince the core team that I was right on this, that using placeholders is believed to save time. My contention was that it doesn't. And with a small team, you can't do things that waste time. So I said, we can't do this. And the reason why I knew I was right was because I did a claim for Robcbwilson in the last Get It Done week, where all I had to do was replace one tree type with another tree type, a specific, very specific. There's a tree, okay, replace it with another tree. It should take, if that convention is correct and it's that quick, it should take a matter of a second to replace one tree with another tree. But the trouble is that the trees are different shapes, they're different sizes, they have different branch configurations, so you can't just plop a tree in and you're done. You have to check it from every angle, you have to make sure it's not clipping onto other assets, you need to make sure it's sunk into the ground. And from such a simple example, it was quite clear that this whole idea that using placeholders was not quicker. In fact, it was slower. So that was what was the situation I was in. I knew I was right. And I convinced the core that what I felt was correct, and that is now official Elsweyr policy. So that's why I say trust your instincts and don't be afraid to question convention, because not everything that you see that's being done by other teams or other mods is right, and more particularly, it may not be right for your team. So if you're a team that has a lot of landscapers, you might not be bothered about the fact that placeholders cost you a lot of time when you redo it. You might just think, well, that's fine. We've got lots and lots of level designers. We're okay. But for our team, we didn't feel it was right. So, so that's an example of number one. Number two is you rethink your suggestion based on feedback, and re-represent your idea, having taken their feedback on board. And the most important aspect of this is if someone you trust and respect, and you should trust and respect everybody on the core of your team, because that's why they're there. If they disagree with you, ask yourself why, because people in your core, the core of your team, are not going to disagree with you just for the fun of it. They're not going to go, let's just mess with them. They're gonna disagree with you for a reason. So you go back, and you'll be, everyone's wedded to their ideas. Everyone likes their own ideas, but you have to step back from that and say, right, okay, why are these people that I respect and trust saying that my idea is wrong? Why is that? And my example is for that is YouTube. So one of the things that Elsweyr are looking at doing is creating its own YouTube channel. In fact, we're going to be launching it very, very shortly. I went to the core team with the idea of adding additional content using videos, because one of the problems that we have on Elsweyr is that because we don't have a lot of new landscape to show off, the amount of work that we can show off that isn't spoilers is quite limited. So a lot of people think that our project isn't moving very fast. So I thought we have a problem. People think that our project is slow. If you look at on Reddit, etc., people say that the list of teams fastest to slowest, you've obviously got Cyrodiil in the fastest, and in the rear it's either Elsweyr or Blackmarsh or both. So we have a problem with perception. So I felt that the problem with perception would best be dealt with by creating content. The best content that we have in terms of reaching people is videos. So I thought, okay, well, let's do some videos that show off specific aspects of what we're doing that we can put out so that people can see that we're actually doing stuff. So I said, why don't we put those on YouTube? And the team came back and said, that's a terrible idea. And I thought, first of all, obviously I was a bit like, okay. But then I went away and I thought about it, and I did some research on YouTube about YouTube and how it works, etc., and then realized that they were correct, that the idea of putting non-release videos on a channel that's primarily about release videos was a mistake. So I thought, okay, so what's the solution? We still need a solution to that problem. What's the solution? And the solution was to come up with a separate channel. And so that's what we're going to do moving forward. So now everybody's happy. Everybody agrees that a subservient Elsweyr channel is the best way forward, because we can then market this as there will be no pre-release trailers on, there'll be no announcements. Those will happen on the main Beyond Skyrim channel. This channel is purely just for our little videos of environments or whatever we choose to make. So that's also important. So you don't think, oh, damn, I didn't like my idea. Oh well, sod it, I won't bother. If it's an important idea, and you get disagreement from people that you trust and respect, then you have to go back and you have to repackage it and you have to think about it afresh and come back with another idea. And when I came back with the idea of a subservient YouTube channel, everyone said, yeah, we like that idea. We can go with that. With the normal provisos. So everyone was happy. So the next slide I've put together is just some lessons that I've learned throughout my many years of being a lead, particularly in Beyond Skyrim. I've been a manager in real life, and being a manager in real life is different. But in terms of Beyond Skyrim, the biggest one that I think is, the biggest two, be humble. It's an honor. People ask me, what's it like to lead a Beyond Skyrim team? It's an honor. I'm honored to be a leader of some incredibly talented, incredibly dedicated people. And this goes for all the teams that I'm on, whether I'm a lead or not. You have some fantastic talent, some fantastic people. So I'm very humble to be a lead, and I think that's important. As soon as you start to act in an arrogant way, then you lose sight of what you're doing and what you're there for. The second one goes hand in hand to that, in my opinion, which is to be kind. Every single person in Beyond Skyrim is a volunteer, giving their free time willingly, and that has to be respected and has to be cherished, because it's exactly that. It's free time. There's no money in this. Nobody's going to get famous. We're doing this because we want to do this, because we love the province that we're working on, and we love the people that we're working with. So you have to remember to be kind to people at all times, and that includes members of the public on Discord servers, etc. The next one is, you don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. Some people think they know everything, but nobody knows everything. Always be willing to learn, and never ever forget that you don't know everything. The next one is always set the example for your team. Again, this is not only within the servers the team servers. This is on the outpost. I always say that remember that you're an ambassador for Beyond Skyrim, and as a lead, I'm like, I don't know, a super ambassador. I don't know. So I always try and set the example for the team. One thing I learned from when I very first started in Beyond Skyrim was learn from the best. So when I first started learning, because I joined as a level designer, a very poor level designer, I'd have to say, because I started from scratch. When I was learning, I was watching Uber's streams from way back, because he was the best. Watched what he did, asked him lots of questions, sat in streams for hours just watching what he did, and then took what he did and then adapted it to my own style. So always learn from the best. If you know somebody who does an aspect of something that you'd like to improve on, ask them what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and learn from them. Next one's also very important. I see it on a lot of teams that it's very, very important to promote people who do the job of lead without asking, other than those who want to be a lead. Because in my opinion, it's a bit like the old saying about politicians. The people that you want to be politicians aren't politicians. The people who you want to be politicians don't want to be politicians. Leadership in Beyond Skyrim is a little bit different. If somebody's putting their hand up from the day that they join saying, I want to be a lead, then that would be a red flag for me, because why do they want to be a lead? It may not be for the right reasons. It may be. They may develop. They may change over time. But I think that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, particularly when you're building a team. If you are building a team, the next thing is quite difficult, because if your own bias against people for whatever reason, but good ideas come from everywhere. So never discount people's thoughts for any reason, even if you don't like them. That doesn't mean that their ideas are bad just because you may not like them or you may not agree with them. This next one's is also another common mistake which I see in other teams, which is you have to avoid creating an echo chamber in the core of a team. One of the things I learned from work was that you can always tell when you're becoming senior in a company because people start finding your jokes funny. So my manager or my manager's managers would tell jokes and people would be laughing in the aisles like they were in a comedy show, because they are desperate to please. Don't want that in your core team. You don't want people just saying yes all the time. Disagreement is healthy. It challenges you, it stretches you, it makes sure that you're coming up with the right answers to the right questions. Everyone agreeing with you is not healthy. Unless, of course, you're right, which is fine, but it shouldn't happen every single time, because then you've created an echo chamber where, for whatever reason, nobody ever says no, and that's not healthy for a good team. Another thing that people misunderstand about being a lead, everyone thinks that being a lead is all exciting, secret handshakes, etc., being interviewed by journalists and all of that kind of good stuff. Part of being a good lead is doing the things that people never see. I personally have been criticised in the past because people have accused me of not doing anything because they don't see me doing anything. But that's because I'm doing all of those things that I listed in that earlier slide, and it shows of a lack of understanding on their behalf of what a lead actually does, rather than what they think a lead does. And the next one is lead by example. If you want people to do things a certain way, then you act a certain way. And the last thing is always give credit to people where you can. And this goes back to the fact that if people are volunteering their free time. So I always make sure I credit artists on trailers whenever their work is discussed anywhere, on Discord or Reddit. I even do it on streams when I walk past an asset. I will try and give credit to the person that created it, because it's important, because you're giving something back to people in one of the few ways that we can, given that we're a volunteer organisation and we can't pay people. So that's the end of my presentation. So I'll open the floor to any questions.
You mentioned that you started in level design and
Correct, yes.
you moved into production. Was there a point where, when you were leaving the level design and going into more production, did you, I guess, have to reason with you? I guess my question is, do you miss level design or other non-production duties at this point?
I'm lucky in the fact that I have a lot of spare time, so I can do both. So I don't miss level design, because actually I was doing it half an hour ago while I was waiting for this slot to start. I was actually doing some level design in Elsweyr. So I miss being able to do it as much as I want. I haven't had to give it up. I know that some other team leads have had to largely give up what they joined beyond Skyrim to do, but I still managed to find the time. So I'm quite fortunate in that respect.
Cool. Thanks. Can shoot you with another question. Oh, go ahead.
How do you deal with the drama in team, like just when there are toxic people in team, or you have something that spills to the community?
So yes, toxic people in the team. Thankfully we don't get that many in Elsweyr, because we don't get that much recruitment, sadly. But in terms of dealing with toxic people, you have to deal with them quickly. You have to decide what you're going to do with them quickly. Where it gets complicated, I think, for some people is that they give people a pass. They say, well, this person's toxic, but they're a really good artist. So we'll sort of put up with some of their misbehavior because they're so key to the team. What we typically do on Elsweyr is we say, thankfully, we haven't had very many people. We have had to remove a handful, but not very many. We tend to remove them quite quickly because, as I said on that slide, we work very, very hard to create a very welcoming, very safe, very friendly atmosphere. And we personally think that the atmosphere is more important than a specific artist. So if we had somebody, regardless of who they were, suddenly start to just be nasty, we would remove them. Although, as I said, other teams choose to play that in a different way, but that's how we deal with it.
I have a question. You said you started a project. How do you do that? How do you like build a team?
So actually, I was thinking of talking to Leftover Pat about doing that as another of these, but I can give you a brief summary of how we did it. So we started Tes Valenwood last May, as you saw on the slide, and basically what we did was we started a team and it didn't work, so we left that team, and we created a second Valenwood team. The first Valenwood team is subsequently folded, but and we learned from those mistakes. And if I do a second AToMM presentation in the future, I'll go into the lessons that we learned in more detail. But what we did was Mr. JGT and I, we sat with just the two of us for over 6 months, and in that time, Mr. JGT went through so and everywhere else he could find, and he basically created I think it's a 60-page document of pretty much every single law reference to Valenwood that there is, and we then the foundations, because in my thinking, building a mod is no different to building a house. You have to have, and this is one of the reasons why our first Valenwood failed, you have to have a very, very solid foundation. You also need to know exactly what it is you're doing, and you have to trust the person that you're doing it with. So Mr. JGT and I have known each other for since Broomer, I think, a long time, and obviously because Elsweyr and Cyrodiil are next to each other, and I was brought in as level design lead, and Mr. JGT is level design lead of Cyrodiil, to my understanding. We worked closely in the past. We talked a lot. We did like the walkabout streams that we've done for the last 2 years. We do those together, so we knew each other very, very well. And then we built slowly. We started off with our core team, the two of us. We then built up as much documentation as we could. We built up the infrastructure, and then we slowly started to bring people in. And then we brought people in on the understanding of this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is why we're doing it, and we were a lot more organized. And then we built up slowly. We also built up differently in that we built up with people from outside of Beyond Skyrim, so that a lot of them were new to modding, and most of them had never modded before, particularly our concept artists. So we brought people on with no baggage, with no expectations or no experience of Skyrim modding. So we were able to mold the team into exactly what we wanted, and that's how we built up.
I see. Thanks for the answer.
I have like a question/comment, if that's okay. They're
Oh.
pretty related, that's why. So like the project management, like the comment basically is just saying I would really like another talk, mostly just because, if I go on the website, the project management page is pretty minimal compared to how fleshed out the other areas are. And I think it'd just be a lot more helpful to have like more resources on there, because project management is kind of something that flows between all these different areas that everyone here works in, right? And you need to have, like you said, a solid lead to be able to manage your team and, give proper directions and feedback to accomplish your goals, right? I don't know. I
Yeah,
just think it'd be a lot more helpful for everyone to have, I guess, more experience with that, so they kind of understand what the team lead actually does, right? Like you're saying, people didn't really understand your job. So I don't know. My question is just like, is there any way we could get a more project management stuff or anything like that? You know,
I
Yes.
think yes, I think the answer to that would be that that there should be more lectures like this. This is the first one for production. It definitely shouldn't be the last. So I think what would be a good idea, and it doesn't necessarily have to be me, although I'm happy to do them. If anyone has any ideas of lectures that could be presented at something like an AToM, then that would be fantastic. As I said, I'm more than happy to do one on how to start a project based on my specifically based on my experience with Valenwood, what I did wrong, what I did right, what we changed between the two, etc., to give people some ideas about how to do that. But just generally, if you have questions about a specific aspect of project management, like say for example you're particularly interested in the organization part, then we could do myself or somebody else could do a talk on that, to flesh that out, because I think that this is a great place to do it, the Arcane University, because a lot of people come here to learn about Skyrim modding, so it's a good place to store it, and I think videos are quite approachable way of doing it as well.
yeah, that's exactly the answer I was looking for. And you mentioned, it doesn't have to be you. I actually study project management in college. I'm about to graduate next year. So if you ever need any extra information, I can find some of my academic resources to hand out as well for other people to use, because a lot of that kind of goes into detail about how to manage a team and how to build a team, like you were saying. And I don't know, more information is always better. Just kind of bring more context to everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, another question about regarding the starting a new project. How do you go about documenting everything that needs to be done to create a minimum viable product? Do you document everything, and how do you do it, or do you just go with the flow and see if you have done enough and it's
So
finished?
I was lucky, obviously. Being a lead of an existing project, I was lucky. So what I cheated. So basically, what I did was I went onto the Google Drive for Elsweyr, and I looked at the documentation that we had, and I said, right, we need one of those. We definitely need one of those. We need one of those. And so I just literally went through the list of documents that we have and said, right, we need to create these documents. And so that's what we did. But to give you an idea. Obviously you need things that are absolutely key are things like a master law document, sort of a high level thing, effectively saying what is Valenwood and who are the Bosma, starting at that kind of high level, and then working down to the regions of the province, the different clans, the different guilds, information about the cities, finding the biomes. There's quite a lot. It doesn't when you begin, it doesn't have to be in great detail. The detail comes later, but you just need to be able to say. So, for example, Arinthia, the city in the northeastern corner of Valenwood, bordering Elsweyr and Cyrodiil. That's the area that we're focusing on at the moment. So the people in the team need to know what's Arinthia like, who lives there, what the surrounding environment is, etc. So you start off from the very high level, and then as you flesh the team out, you build up on that foundation, and you say, okay, we've got Arinthia. We know who lives there. We know what it's like. Who specifically lives there, how many people, what race are they, etc. And then you build up and you build up and you build up like that. So you if you were starting a team completely fresh with no experience whatsoever and no other team that you were on, you would start from those basic, very, very basic building blocks, and then build up from there.
Have you struggled with providing those key, like, I know you were talking about like motivation earlier with your long-term goals and short-term goals with your team. Do you struggle with providing those like ideas for motivation? What are some ideas that you might give to a producer?
So yes, you can, because obviously this is a multi-year project. This is it's an insanely long project. It's I mean, how long it's going to take to finish, I don't know. Of course, it depends on when you start the clock. So you could say that Elsweyr started in 2006. It's an Oblivion project, or you could say that it started in 2011, 2012 when it moved to Beyond Skyrim, or you could say that it started in 2016 when it was rebooted. But however you define it, it's a very long project. So yes, you do need to keep people motivated, and I think that the idea that one of my core team members had about 6 to 8 months ago of short-term goals is the key to keep people motivated. You have to find those short-term goals, and it's not too difficult. The only thing that's difficult is that you have to achieve, or you have to be able to show progress towards those short-term goals. I think that's where you can fall into trouble if you have a short-term goal and the team's just not, for whatever reason, is not meeting it. So, for example, at the moment, Elsweyr and every other Beyond Skyrim team has a lot of students, and it's a bad time of year at university for students because they've got exams, they've got big projects that they are finishing off. So as a result, at this crunch time of year, the productivity from our students goes right down, because why would they a 3D model for Elsweyr when they've got a final next week? So it can be difficult. Keeping people moving when there's not many people doing anything can be difficult. Finding short-term goals is not difficult, but maintaining the progress towards them can be.
Do you ever set deadlines for those short-term goals, or are you usually pretty hesitant to do that?
We have deadlines. They tend to be things rather than times. So, for example, there's a walkabout planned for Beyond Skyrim at some point this year. I can't tell you when because it's still a secret. But we have goals elsewhere that there are certain things that we want to show off in that walkabout. So that's a deadline of sorts. That's about as close to we get as deadlines, because, as I said, with a constantly changing team, it's very, very difficult to create. It's difficult enough. I worked in IT, and in my last job, I worked in actual development, website development, or web app development, and even with a team of dedicated professionals, deadlines are difficult enough. It's even more difficult when you chuck in the fact that we're all volunteers with other things to do. So deadlines are generally not done unless people ask for them. Every now and then we get somebody who says, "Look, I'm a real procrastinator. Could you just give me deadlines so that I keep working?" But generally speaking, we don't do it.
My follow-up to that, I guess, is do you set actual times for these collab events that you guys do, such as your writing events?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So the way that we do that, again, it's all done democratically. We use software called, it's a web app called Doodle, and I create a doodle with a variety of times throughout a 2-week period, and just ask people to vote, and then people vote for the most and whichever one of them is the most popular is when we hold it. We've found that works best if we do things actually around about this time, because that gives people in the States, people in Australia, New Zealand, and people in Europe the best chance of working together So we typically do them around about this time, but it's any day within a 2, maybe 3 week period is the options that people have to choose from. And then, as I said, the most popular one becomes the meeting time, and then that is nailed on. That's when we do it.
Cool.
So you kind of mentioned these like group work sessions, but when you're working on just kind of in general, like the bigger project, and of course you're working with volunteer workers, right? So that no one's really on a designated schedule or getting paid to actually show up at a time or whatever. What's the like the best strategy you have in order to make sure that communication between team members is still fluid? You know, besides all the hurdles that you have to overcome with different time zones and locations and time commitments with other stuff like real life jobs.
I think the most important thing is to make sure that all communication happens on the server itself. I know a lot of people like to speak in DMs, etc. But the most important thing, I think, to make sure that everyone's on the same page is to make sure that as much communication as possible happens on the server. Because if people feel like they're missing out, then it becomes a problem. And also, if the server is very, very quiet, that also becomes a problem because it becomes a bit like a library, and then everyone's a bit frightened to speak because it's so quiet. So I think making sure that everyone speaks on the server is probably the most important thing.
Constantine says, question regarding leading. How does a leader consolidate / revise / plan every work that the other teams had submitted into this one big project? Wouldn't this mean that generally speaking, the leader has to be good at all of those subjects in order to actually get the best outcome?
Not necessarily. I think it's important that you understand something about everything that goes on. When I joined Elsweyr, the only thing I knew about Elsweyr was that the Khajiit lived there. That was literally that was the summation of my knowledge, and I had very little 3D knowledge. I literally was a level designer, and that was it. One of the things I've done since then is I've branched out. I do 3D now as well as level design, and I know something about the law. But more importantly, I think the most important thing to make sure that you understand what you're doing is that you understand the province that you're leading. So to give you an example of my transformation from literally knowing one thing about Elsweyr to understanding it is that occasionally, much to my fiance's horror, I will pause a movie to take a screenshot because I've seen something that just looks so Khajiit or looks so at home and Elsweyr that I want to either add it as a claim, which I have done before, or show it on the server to say, look what I've seen. Isn't this cool? We could do this with that. And if you get to that kind of point where you understand what it is you're doing, I don't know the law very well. I'm learning the law through the workshops, etc., and obviously through just hearing it a lot. But if you understand what it is you're building, and this is something that I'm also doing, I'm learning with Valenwood. Again, I didn't know much about Valenwood either, other than that it has a lot of trees. But over time, as you become more comfortable and you become more accustomed to it, if you can explain to someone what Elsweyr is, then you'll be able to lead it effectively because you'll be able to look at something, and you may not know, like if it's a piece of concept art. I don't know much about concept art. I may not know whether it's good or bad concept art, but I'll know whether or not what that person is drawing will fit into the project as a whole.
If I could weigh in on that just a little bit, on the question, I think if you are leading a project, you know what you know and you know what you don't know.
Absolutely, yes.
And so finding the right people who, know the things that you don't know to balance it out, and then trusting them to essentially keep the quality of your vision, then that's good. You
Yes,
obviously can't do
absolutely,
everything yourself. So collaboration's key.
It is, yes. And you're absolutely right. If you have the right people as leads, we've been incredibly fortunate on Valenwood, and that the people, just by pure miracle, the people that I recruited, because I did the recruitment, have been able to step up in the key roles of 3D and 2D. For writing, Ronan is the writing lead, because writers are incredibly difficult to find. People who, obviously, writers are very common, but people who can write for Skyrim are very, very, very rare, and they're almost all on other teams. So, but for our 2D and 3D lead, where I was able to find people brand new and put them into roles, and they're doing absolutely fantastically. And in Elsweyr, obviously the core was pretty much there before I was, or at least some of it. And we've been able to promote people who are doing a very, very, very good job. People like Asher and Omda and Sotham. Well, they're all doing a fantastic job. It would be unfair to name them individually because they're all doing brilliantly. So yes, you're absolutely right. You have to have people that you can trust, whose opinion that you can trust.
Yeah, that's one of those things that is like constantly hammered down in my project management, like just course is like identifying your strengths as a leader or a manager, and when you're handling the project, how you relate to the content that's involved in it, and then also when you're building your team, finding people who can address skill inadequacies that you might have or things that you might not know. Basically, being able to kind of build a team as a single entity with all these skills that all of you can bring to the table. Yeah, I thought that was a really good point.
Oh, I see that somebody's typing. Oh, two people are typing something, so we'll wait to see what they've got to ask. Is there a formula to choosing, prioritizing short and long-term goals, like deciding to start with Iniquina or Palatine, or choosing to focus on interior versus biomes? So if we start from the pre-release, so the pre-release in Elsweyr has had an interesting history. When I joined in 2016, 17, it was Moonpath to Elsweyr. It then morphed to become Iniquina in its entirety. That I don't know if it included June, but it certainly included the trio of cities, Riverhold, Orcrest, and Rimmen. So you can see on the questions, actually, the lovely map drawn by the super talented Zerg, that it was almost the entirety of Iniquina that we were building. And again, Omda and I sort of came to the same conclusions independently. I think he mentioned it first, but we were basically both looking at it thinking, oh my God, 3 cities is an enormous amount of Elsweyr to do. You can see even just geographically, it's a huge amount in terms of the overall project size, province size, and with 3 entirely different cities, that's an enormous amount of work. So we cut it down to just that. So that question was already answered for us. I think the reason why Iniquina makes sense as opposed to the southern areas of Elsweyr is that Iniquina, by its own aesthetic, is a very empty feeling, open spaced province, which makes a pre-release a lot easier. You can see, if you're looking at the map, you can see that area where Alabaster, Corinth, and Torval are. That whole belt there is forests, and forests have an enormous asset requirement. They are very difficult to make, especially when you think that this mod was originally done in Legendary Edition. So starting from that side and working up would have been much more difficult than doing the emptier, more open areas of Iniquina. And also the other reason, of course, is that when people think of Elsweyr, they think of the desert. So it just made sense. But in answer to your question about the short-term goals, I look at the pre-release as a journey. I have actually done a pre-release roadmap. We don't refer to it very much, but it's a useful document to see. It's basically a list of everything that we need to do. And basically what I do is I think of 2 things. I think, first of all, of the pre-release, and then I also think of things in terms of a marketable unit. at work, we used to call that an MVP, a minimum viable product. In other words, if you have one thing that's complete, you can do something with that one thing. So that's why a fully cluttered interior is a minimum viable product. It is something that we can do something with. We can show that off on walkabouts. We can put that into trailers. We can show that as progress. So that's why I choose things are discrete things. Another thing, for example, might be a tile set. It's a discrete thing, or a city. That's another discrete thing. So that's the way that I tend to break up things in general, and also the pre-release as well. So that's how I choose the short-term goals. And I start by thinking of things that are most beneficial to the team. What do people ask for most? What can we do to show progress best? And people like looking at interiors and clutter and stuff like that. So that's how I choose the short-term goals to get us to our medium-term goals, which is the pre-release, and then obviously to the long-term goal, which is to finish the mod.
So you just kind of talked about managing like what you want to get done and what you want to get done first, kind of figuring out the order and organizing your short-term and long-term goals. But what about like scenarios, for example, when you've already invested time into something that you might have to give up that part of the project, for example, because you got to prioritize another component? What are those like difficult situations for you? Like, are they common? How do you navigate them?
Thankfully, they're not common, but do happen, and I have an example for you actually, which is the last Elsweyr developer diary. So we were scheduled to do one in January, and going back to your point earlier about trusting people, one of the people that I trust a great deal, and his opinion obviously, is Zay or Daniel Rand, the composer for Cyrodiil, who I've worked with on. We did the Atmora dev diary together, we did the Roskria dev diary together, and we did obviously the Elsweyr dev diary together. And he knows how to do a dev diary, how much content is required, etc., etc. So I went to him in November and said, we're up to do the dev diary in January, and he said to me, you don't have enough stuff. You don't have enough stuff to show off Elsweyr for 7 minutes, particularly as IB went out and did an enormous 16-minute dev diary the month before. That put an enormous amount of pressure on what we were going to do. So he said, look, you can't do one. You won't be able to do one that shows Elsweyr off as we want it to be shown off. If you do a dev diary with the content that you've got, it won't look any good. Oh, okay. And he's an expert. We did those 3 dev diaries together. He's done other trailers as well. He knows what he's talking about. So there you go.
That's a really good answer. I mean, oops, sorry, continue.
We were really upset that the Elsweyr call, myself in particular, were really upset, but he's an expert. His knowledge of that very specific thing is pretty much unchallenged, because he does the dev diaries for everywhere except for Black Marsh and Morrowind. So he knows a lot about it. He said you can't do it. Can't do it.
That's just, I guess, part of finding like a really good team is finding someone who's willing to tell you no, even when everyone else wants them to say yes. So
yeah, I would. It would have suited me at the time for him to say yes, but he was right. Our dev diary, particularly off the back of IB's very, very long one, would have looked, because you can always tell when someone's trying to pad something out to make it longer, particularly with videos, etc. It just looks slow, and it looks very, it just doesn't look right. So yeah, that's probably the best example I can think of that exact scenario where things haven't gone well, but you've just got to roll with it. Okay, so we've got a very long question from Bard. I'll just take my glasses off so I can read it. here come in the department leads. The overall lead doesn't need to be a behemoth that knows and do everything. Is there a question? They should be able to recognise the proper people to appoint as department leads, members that are experienced in that specific field, pleasant to work with and able to give you. Oh, I see. Yes, you're just agreeing. Yes, I agree. That looks like a comment, actually. Having read it, I don't think there's a question in there. Right, okay. It's a very accurate comment. Yes. What's the question?
I guess while these people are typing, I have maybe another question, kind of like relating towards cooperation between like different projects altogether. Is it common to maybe reuse an asset or a model from a different project, another project? Say, for example, it could fit in. I know the whole idea is to kind of give each area its own look, but a certain type of tree or maybe like a bucket or something. Do y'all have like a list of things that can commonly be used, or do you regularly communicate, or does everyone just kind of like do their own thing?
So that's the power of Beyond Skyrim, obviously. So we have BS Assets, which is our ESM of shared assets, which are free to be used within, well, however you see fit. So if you stick something into BS Assets, that's effectively what you're saying. You're saying you can use that in your province however or wherever you want to, obviously within the realms of it's got to make sense, some kind of sense, but that's what BS Assets is for. And obviously with us and Cyrodiil being neighbours and also sharing BS Heartland, we see a lot of our assets being used in Cyrodiil. And as we start to level design in Elsweyr ourselves, particularly places like Riverhold, which has got a strong Imperial presence, we'll use Cyrodiil assets as well. Also in the walkabouts, whenever, because we're so far from Skyrim, whenever I use an asset that we don't have, I borrow one from Cyrodiil because I figure it makes more sense for an asset that doesn't currently exist in Elsweyr to come from Cyrodiil than it does to come from Skyrim. For the teams who haven't yet got that far, so for the Dominion teams, because obviously Elsweyr and Valenwood are closely aligned because I lead both of them, and Alinor as well, because I also lead that too. Although in a different capacity, I'm not the overall lead, I'm just a lead on Alinor. We have already set up some Dominion sharing. So, for example, Elsweyr completed an Alinor concept for some Dominion barrels and also some other Dominion clutter. And those assets will be shared across the 3 Dominion projects and will also be available for teams in Beyond Skyrim to use. For example, Iliac Bay expressed an interest in using our Dominion assets. They have some kind of Dominion influence or area that they want to clutter. So we do that. Another thing that we're looking at on the Dominion side is sharing things like rocks. So the small rocks that you see littering the ground absolutely everywhere. The idea that is that the three teams, so Valenwood, Alinor, and Elsweyr, will make their own small sets of rocks and then share them. So we end up with a massive set, so that you don't have to worry about walking from Elsweyr to Valenwood and saying, "Oh, I'm sure I've seen that before." You don't want to go past the same tree 12 times in your journey, so we're sharing similar small assets that can be used across all 3 provinces that way, so that we can increase the asset pool between the teams.
Yeah, that sounds like honestly probably the best solution. It's got a little bit of just custom asset creation, a little bit of sharing with other projects, and of course,
Yep.
realistically speaking, on the map, the borders aren't so clearly defined. There's going to be kind of like a leaking of cultures, and for other story elements, say there's someone from the Aldemary Dominion and High Rock or whatever the case is, and there's a quest line. Maybe you need some assets from that to kind of paint the picture that this guy is from here or this girl is from here, and make it feel more like the entire world of Tamriel rather than just one region. So I think that's
Yeah.
it's a really good solution. I
And
think
for
someone in the chat has a similar question.
Yeah. Further to that, just one quickly before I answer the question in the chat. Obviously, the border between Elsweyr and Valenwood has switched hands tons, like England and France, and as a result, there's a very vast area rather than between Cyrodiil and Elsweyr. There's a very small area, a blend area. In between Elsweyr and Valenwood, the blend area will be quite wide, where you're sort of slowly going into what's truly Valenwood as you move further and further west. So yes, the question is a good question. Do we often use assets from the vanilla game? Absolutely not. So one of the things that I had to convince people about when I first became lead was that using vanilla assets regardless of the reason doesn't make any sense, because Skyrim and Elsweyr are extraordinarily far apart, both geographically but also culturally as well. It just doesn't make sense for Skyrim assets to pop up in Elsweyr unless they are very specifically. So I don't know, there might be a Nord who lives in a house in Torval, for example, who is homesick and brings something specifically from Skyrim to put in his house. That would be the only that type of thing would be the only reason why you would see Skyrim assets in Elsweyr. The exception being that very small instances, like for example, I just implemented a T-urn that was created by the team. It uses the coals that fire the T-urn. Those are the Skyrim coals, but you can hardly see them. All you really see is orange light. So it's a very, very, very restricted case. It just doesn't make sense on any level to have lots of Skyrim assets so far away. We avoid it at all costs, which again makes Elsweyr slower, but it also makes it more coherent and more believable because everything is from Elsweyr, or we stole it from Cyrodiil.
Does anybody else have questions for Rob?
How would you define the core of the team? And
so
what
the core,
do they do?
So the core of the team are Elsweyr. It's a little bit different. So in the core of a team consists of the departmental leads, so sound design, music, 2D, 3D, level design, implementation, voice acting, etc. And we also have people on the team the core team who have either been there since before I joined and have done key things. So for example, we have the person who designed Rimmen, Vertidirt. They're a member of the core, and a couple of other people who have been there a very, very long time, who probably back in the day used to be department leads and are now seen more as senior members. So it's a mixture of department leads and senior members basically are in the core.
Thank you.
Again, actually, harking back to my point about looking at convention and deciding whether or not to break with it. One of the things that I did in January, which has been immensely successful for the team, is I created a 3D texture artist team, and it is we have, because they are able to just work on textures. We are creating a texture library that can be used on assets, and that's been immensely successful. So we've recently promoted somebody to the lead of that team as well. Because again, one of the things that you as a lead you need to constantly do is you need to constantly look at your team as objectively as you can, and you say, right, okay, what area of the team is not going as well as we would like it to do, and what can I do about it? And usually there's an answer. Sometimes it's an easy answer, sometimes it's a very difficult answer, sometimes you can't answer it yet, you just have to keep on trying. But you have to constantly look at your team, particularly when you're a smaller team that doesn't get the same organic recruitment that some of the other teams do. You have to aggressively look at your team and say, right, okay, what can we improve? What can we do better? How can we get to our short and medium term goals faster? Do we need more people? Do we need better people? What do we need? And so that's one of the other things that I do on a regular basis as well.
All right. If nobody has any other questions, you guys are welcome to keep asking him questions in DM or anytime in orientation or lecture hall or wherever you want to ping him. Rob, thank you. This is awesome.
You're welcome.
First and, like
Pleasure.
you said, hopefully not the last production lecture.
Absolutely. Yeah.